Good evening. It is 7 p.m. and I'm the Deputy Town Clerk, Margie Tachi. Before we get started, I have a few announcements. Tonight's regularly scheduled Town Council work session is a virtual meeting pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3708.2 as amended, the Governor's Executive Orders as amended, and in accordance with Ordinance 20-0-23, Continuity of Governmental Operations During Pandemic Disaster COVID-19, as amended and readopted by the Herndon Town Council on September 8, 2020, which supersedes previously adopted amendments. The proper notice of the electronic meeting is provided in accordance with the Code of Virginia. Agenda and meeting materials, along with information for viewing the meeting and submitting comments for the record, are available on the town's website. The meeting will begin with a roll call to determine a quorum, and all votes, including adjournment, will be by roll call vote. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Margie. I'll call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to please call the roll. As the clerk calls attendance, please unmute your mics and respond clearly by stating your name and that you are present.
Town Manager.
Bill Ashton is present.
Town Attorney.
Lisa Yates, present.
Olam.
Sheila Olam, present.
Baker.
Jen Baker, present.
Delagula.
Councilmember Delagula, present.
DeCall.
Pradeep Jakal, present.
Friedrichs.
Friedrichs, present.
McKenna.
Bill McKenna is present.
Merkel.
And Lisa Merkel is present. So for the record, we do have a quorum electronically. First off this evening, I'll recognize our town manager for comments regarding the COVID-19 situation. Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It has been several weeks since we last spoke about COVID, and there's been many changes, not for the good, most of which not for the good, as relates to the pandemic. The numbers in the northern region in Fairfax County continue to rise. You're seeing increases in percent positivity, emergency department visits. You're seeing case counts going up. So you're seeing trends that are starting to get back to where we were in late spring, and they are still increasing. And they believe, the healthcare professionals believe, that they will continue to increase. Hospitalizations and deaths are not rising, fortunately, but those are lagging indicators. So we're not sure where those numbers will go in the coming weeks. Long-term care facilities are not, according to the Fairfax County Health Department, they are not seeing the outbreaks in long-term care facilities they were seeing back in the spring. And they attribute this to the very strict mitigation efforts that have been put into place in long-term care facilities. And these are mitigation efforts that the county health department is doing spot checks on, and they've enhanced and have increased enforcement on, and it seems to be working. Also, workplace exposures are not a matter at this time. It seems like the people are bringing COVID into their workplaces, but is not spreading amongst the workplaces, according to the healthcare professionals. And that also bears out for the town. We have seen an increase on town staff with positive cases. So our experience is the same, but these positive cases seem to be coming from outside, and they're not being transmitted while at work. That being said, we have a very aggressive contact tracing program that we have, and if you have near exposures, you are put on admin leave, and we have a whole protocol surrounding that. As a matter of fact, I sent you a video earlier today that discusses that protocol. It was meant for our staff to see, but I thought you'd be interested as well. At the end of the day, it's about personal responsibility. Dr. Glory keeps reiterating that gatherings shouldn't be happening. People need to be wearing their masks. They need to be doing the right things and social distancing. But the problem is the message is starting to get old, and people are starting to lose a little bit of their discipline when it comes to that question. As a matter of fact, that creates another issue for the healthcare professionals, because they're saying there are some morale issues associated with they're working tirelessly to battle this disease, and people aren't taking it seriously, and that to them is is something that's really beginning to have its effect on the morale of those employees. Dr. Gloria goes on to talk about in a meeting back on the 13th of November where masks are seeming to make a difference. They are driving a milder disease, especially among the healthy. Those with healthy immune systems with mask usage, they're seeing a much less of a disease burden. That is also bearing out with the statistics we're seeing on staff as well. Our staff positives tend to be either asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. There is not a significant symptomatic case, thank goodness. And hopefully we can continue with that moving forward, because we'd hate to have something terrible happen to a member of our staff. Another piece of the good news, and it comes down to a series of calls that I've been on. One was earlier this week with the mayors and chairs. The mayor was also on the call, and it was talking about vaccinations, and that the Pfizer vaccination on December 10th will be reviewed by the FDA for immediate implementation. They reminded us that what you have to remember about the vaccinations themselves is it's not they took shortcuts in the testing. By the federal government infusing all the money up front, they didn't have to wait after each iteration of testing to do a financial assessment of whether or not this was worthwhile moving forward. That risk was taken off the table by the federal government, and so they were able to plunge from the one testing regimen to the next. The FDA is reviewing the testing results right now, and the Pfizer vaccine should be available by the end of the year in very limited quantities, mainly for healthcare professionals. This is also the one with the most significant logistical consideration with storage and distribution. So it will be most likely deployed through hospital systems, which means healthcare workers first. First responders will be high on the list, long-term care facilities and the like. As of today, if you read the newspaper, Moderna also submitted their emergency declaration to the FDA, and that will be reviewed probably later this month. So as far as widespread vaccinations themselves, we're still not talking until end of second quarter of next year. So we're talking about as it pushes closer to summer, late spring, early summer, before you get a widespread distribution among the populace. And that's just because the vast numbers of vaccinations that have to occur. And then it becomes a problem of messaging. There are a lot of people resistant to vaccines in general, and some resistance to ones that were fast-tracked. And both the state, the county, and the people we've talked to at the Fed are saying the exact same thing, which is we have to message that although shortcuts were taken, safety wasn't compromised. And this is part of the messaging that has to go out. There's also a massive push for vaccinations protocols out of the state for at-risk, lower-income individuals to make sure that those are available to them, and we have pipelines to them. I will get more information on that in another immunization call that I have with Dr. Gloria on Thursday. Actually, I'm going to be able to only sit in half of it, but Jean will take the whole call for me, and we'll get additional information on the immunization, at least from a county perspective, moving forward. That's all I have, Madam Mayor. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, sir. If I could add on and just reiterate what the manager said, the thing that was the biggest takeaway to me from that call, on top of just the logistics of getting these various vaccinations out, because there are two parts in the window of your first shot and your booster for the two are different. The biggest thing that she wanted us to take away was that safety issue not being a concern, because I've heard it, I'm sure you have too, just kind of in passing, oh, they fast track this. I don't know if I'm going to take it because it's, have they taken all the precautions? But they were adamant that that is not the case. And I think that maybe explaining that federal funding piece being what is shortening the wait time in between the different stages is really key and made me feel a lot better about it personally. So I just wanted to reiterate that because it was pretty fascinating what's happening. So questions for Mr. Ashton. Mr. McKenna.
I have two. First one, just for the edification of the I guess you can say the population that is listening up to this. Were there any discussions on the CDC forecasting for the state of Virginia regarding modeling through December 15th and what they're showing in regards to daily infections based upon current trends?
We have not. I've not been privy to any. It has not come up on any of my phone calls. I'm sure if it was something, again, the calls I've had this week included Dr. Gloria, Dr. Good friend out of Loudoun County, and the immunization project manager down in Richmond. So those people, nobody has mentioned any of that, any of those calls.
Okay.
So they haven't mentioned specific data, but Dr. Goodfriend in the call a week or so ago said, conventional wisdom among his peers is that December is going to be worse than November and January is going to be worse than December.
Absolutely.
But there's not actual numbers to go with that.
There's no projections. It's just the key is going to be that keeping the hospitalizations at bay the best we can, keeping the flu out of the mix, and continue to have the discipline of the social distancing, of the masking, of hand washing, of not going to work if you're sick, and making sure employers are doing their part to make people comfortable not to go to work when they're not feeling well. And I know we have done that here at the town, and employers elsewhere have to do the exact same thing.
Okay, great. Thanks. And the Monte Carlo simulations definitely are not good based upon those numbers. So that bears true. The second part is, I know a lot of people, obviously I'm seeing it in the media, and I've also heard everyone's looking forward to vaccination. With Operation Warp Speed, did they give you an idea of what the percentage of population that would be inoculated with this in the first round? I have some preliminary numbers in some states, but just so people know that this isn't going to happen tomorrow.
No, that's why I want to keep reiterating. It's not, and widespread distribution is until late second quarter of next year. The first series of vaccines coming. 7.6% of the available vaccines are coming to Virginia, and believe it or not, that number is not as large as you think it is. And it's going to be distributed through the hospital chains for healthcare workers, and then they're going to start getting into the first responders with that first go around. But it is not, the number is under 100,000 vaccines.
Right, and I can tell you that 7% is high. For other states, because I can tell you the aggregate for Warp Speed throughout the country is between 3 and about 6.5% based upon distribution. And that doesn't even cover first responders and people who are at risk. So, for example, the state of New Jersey, with a population of 9.2 million, might get 500,000, of vaccines, which won't even cover police and fire. So just be aware of that, and I think it's important. So that's all I have. Thank you.
No, it was very apparent in talking to the head of the vaccination program down in Richmond, where she was indicating that really you got to get Moderna online. You got to get both of those supply chains operational. The thing about the Moderna one is it doesn't have nearly the logistical overhead that the Pfizer one does. Okay, and they both need boosters. You both need two. One is a 3-week booster. One is a 4-week booster. It truly is going to be, the logistical elements to this is going to be a challenge across the board, not just the distribution down to the individual people. And quite frankly, that's one of the things that I know that state has looked at a lot. That's something that county is looking at a lot, how to incorporate, drugstores into this mix, point care providers into this mix. And they're going to try to get the later rounds out, but the first rounds are going to be very limited, and they're already targeted to the highest risk groups coming out of the gate. So, and for the general population, like I said, it's going to be it's going to be 6 months until it's in widespread distribution.
I really appreciate it, Bill. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you. What other questions do you have for the town manager? Anyone? Okay. Well, thank you, sir. So let's see. I will first ask whether the clerk has received comments for the record on any of our items this evening, and whether you have received any transactional disclosure declarations from council.
No, Madam Mayor, the clerk hasn't received any comments for the record or disclosures from council on any items listed on the agenda this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. We will start off the evening with a presentation. This is the presentation of the town's comprehensive annual financial report for the fiscal year that ended June 30th. And next week, the town's auditors, Brown, Edwards and Company, LLP, certified public accountants, will present the report to the council. But I believe do we have Jenny for this item, or did I just give the whole staff report? I think.
Madam Mayor, this is Bill Ashton, Town Manager.
Yes.
You just gave the whole staff report.
All right, that's what I thought.
Traditionally, we don't even talk about it at the work session. It's just put on as a placeholder for the public hearing when the accountants give you the report card.
All right, just making
It's
sure I'm
actually
not leaving anything out. Okay, perfect. So we'll get that presentation next week, but that will be first up on our agenda. We do have several public hearings listed for tonight, and the first one is Resolution 20G56 to consider a special exception number 20-02 to permit a secondary kitchen in a single-family residence at 900 Ballou Street. And we have Michael Wallach, one of our planners, here for the presentation and staff report. And we will also have Lisa Gilleran, our Director of Community Development, and Dave Stromberg, the Zoning Administrator, available for questions, as this is somewhat a complicated issue. So when Mr. Wallach is ready, we are ready for the staff report.
All right. Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. Let's see here. Okay. So yes, what I have for you all this evening is a special exception 20-02, 900 Ballou Street. This is to permit a secondary kitchen within a new residence. This slide here is a zoning map. The property is located in the town's R15 zoning district. Across the street is a residential townhouse cluster, and then further down is a PD-D zoning district. The next slide here is the comprehensive plan map. The property is located within the neighborhood conservation land use designation. Across the street is wetlands and community facilities, and the property is also located near some adaptive area residential and near the Herndon downtown. The property is not located within the town's historic district boundaries. Next slide here is an aerial. As you can see there, the property is located at the intersection of Ballou Street and Park Avenue. The property does kind of slope uphill towards Station Street. This next slide here is the front of the is a photograph of the existing house. This is facing off of Ballou Street. The next slide here is showing the backyard and the back of the existing house. This is taken off of Park Avenue. So the town zoning ordinance splits accessory food preparation area types, splits it up by wet bar and second kitchens. Wet bars are allowed by right, and they would typically include something like a sink, refrigerator, a small microwave, and a smaller sink drainage line, typically about 1.5 inches in diameter or less, where a second kitchen would include an oven, stove, cooktop, a 240-volt outlet, and a bigger sink drain line, typically greater than 1.5 inches in diameter, and only allowed through the special exception process. So the proposal for this house is that the existing dwelling is proposed to be torn down, and in its place would be a new dwelling that would be 8,378.82 square feet of gross floor area. So this would include a finished basement level, a main floor level, and the second floor. The single lot development plan that was submitted is still currently under review by staff. And the proposed dwelling would include 2 wet bars on the basement level and then 2 kitchens on the main floor level. And the applicant has stated that the primary need for 2 kitchens is for religious and dietary reasons. One would be a vegetarian kitchen, and then one would be a The next slide here shows the proposed house to be constructed. It would still be oriented towards Ballou Street. And this next slide here is the proposed main floor level plan, and showing the location of the vegetarian kitchen and the non-vegetarian kitchen, and also where access to the basement level would be located. And this next slide here just zooms in to where the two kitchens would be located. The larger of the kitchens would include a refrigerator, oven, an island with bar stool seating, dishwasher, large sink there, and then and it's located there at the top of the screen. The bottom of the screen there is the location of the non-vegetarian kitchen. Labeled on the plan there is dirty kitchen. Would still have several of those same type of kitchen appliances. So there'd be a dishwasher, oven, stovetop, refrigerator, and then this also shows the location of the stairs down to the basement level. This next slide here is the proposed basement floor plan. The applicant is proposing two wet bars. The first one is located at the top there, and would include some bar seating, and then located there at the bottom within the guest suite is the proposed second wet bar. This would just include a sink and countertop. But this is important because when we evaluated this, we still have to look at this as a wet bar, because if the applicant chose, he could add things like a refrigerator, microwave, and dishwasher without permits. So for that reason, this is also considered a second wet bar. And that is what I have for the council this evening. Town staff is recommending approval with the proposed conditions before you tonight. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you very much. Sydney.
So, Mr. Wallach, I know we can have, they can have a wet bar by right. Can they have two wet bars by right? Is that just the definition?
That's correct. Yeah, the two wet bars is still allowed by right.
Okay, and we're putting a condition on this theoretically to ask them to remove the second kitchen if they should sell the house.
That is correct. It could also be converted to a wet bar
with just the removal of the stove.
That is correct. That could constitute as a wet bar per the language of the zoning ordinance.
And so, some of the things that were said in the initial staff report suggested that there was a concern that this not become a two-family residence. Is that one of the things that we're trying to prevent here?
Yeah, I would say that staff initially had some concern when it came to making sure that an illegal second dwelling would not be created here, and we've tried to mitigate that through the conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? And Lisa Gillerin and Dave Stromberg are also available if needed. Anybody? Pradeep, and followed by Cesar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember Dakal. So my question is, I just wanted to reiterate one more time based on what Councilmember Friedrich asked the question. So the condition number 7, which says the transferability, because this is special exception. And if this house is sold again, then the second kitchen has to be removed before selling. But again, it can be converted into a wet bar, meaning you just have to, the house owner just has to remove the stove and it should be good to go.
I will let the zoning administrator kind of jump in here as well, but it's my understanding that it would just have to be converted to a use permitted by right, and so that could include something like a wet bar.
Right. So the only thing that has to be removed in order to not to be considered as a second kitchen is the range or stove, right?
Good evening, Mayor Merkel and Councilman DeCall. I can jump in and answer that a little bit. You would have to remove the stove, and potentially you may have to remove additional elements. Again, you can't have that high voltage line in there, which is what would be used if it were an electric stove. If it were a gas stove, you would have to go get a plumbing permit to cap that off. So it would be a little bit more, and you would have to put remove where you can't just have a hole. You would have to finish that space off. So that would be converting it to a legally allowable use under the existing conditions, and the condition is worded in a way that it's converted to an allowable use within the zoning ordinance. So theoretically, if there was a zoning text amendment at some point in the future, it could be converted to whatever those standards are. But under the current ordinance language, that's what would have to be done. If a future property owner met similar conditions or had a reason for a second kitchen, they could go through and apply for the special exception, but they would have to go through that process, come back before the planning commission, before the town council. It doesn't just transfer directly over.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Stromberg. The reason I was asking this question is, in order to have a second kitchen, probably the house owner puts, I don't know, $30,000-$40,000 to build the kitchen, talking about the kitchen cabinets, the refrigerator, the stove, and everything that goes in a kitchen. So let's say the owner wants to sell the house, and removing the entire kitchen is losing $30,000-$40,000, versus if it can be converted into a wet bar and only you can remove the high voltage, the outlet, and then just the range, then probably you don't have to do everything. That's the reason why we don't want to put our residents in a situation. We allow them this special exception, and they put like $30,000-$40,000 to build a second kitchen, and then they just have to demolish everything. So that's the reason why I was asking this question. Thank you.
Thank you. Cesar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember DeLaguda. Appreciate the information, Mr. Wellick and Mr. Stromberg. Just so I'm clear, slide 8, I'm not sure I'm reading this right, so help me if you can clarify. Proposed new dwelling. Sounds like they're doing a lot more construction. What's the current square footage gross floor area today versus this 8,378?
Yeah, I had the same question. I thought that was a typo when I first saw it.
Because I like everyone to have the home they want, but this seems like a significant jump, which is fine. My next question was, where's the actual line to the historic district? And if you could just, for grins, help me with that in a blow up, or on slide 3 where that is in relation. So 2 questions there.
Yeah, we can definitely add a map showing where the boundaries are of that. And I think Michael might be pulling the exact numbers, but yeah, the existing house is significantly smaller. I think it's probably around 2,000 square feet. It's only a single story structure.
Okay. So they're basically, it's safe to say it's quadrupling the size of the actual structure.
Yeah, somewhere in that range would probably be a fair assessment. Again, there is no zoning. In zoning, we can't limit the square footage, the maximum size that a house can be. You can't have any type of direct cap, at least in Virginia, still in real estate. You can regulate it indirectly, so that's where your setbacks come in, your height requirements, and your lot area coverage requirements. So you can, the maximum you're allowed to cover your lots is 25% with buildings. But if you can comply with the building area coverage, your impervious area coverage, and your setbacks and your height, then that really defines your buildable area and the square footage of the house that you're allowed to have.
No, I appreciate that. And again, full disclosure, I just want to put it in context for future discussions. Again, if you could, I don't have my map of the historic district, but I think it runs somewhere to the south and north here. So if you could provide that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, just to the east on Station Street, yeah. But yeah, we'll make sure that that's shown in the map for the next one.
Thank you.
So if I could follow up with what Cesar was just asking. So do the setbacks and the lot coverage and all of that allow for an 8,400 square foot house to be built on this lot? I mean, it must. That's not part of the special exception, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, this is Dave Stromberg, zoning administrator answering. But yeah, as long as you can meet those dimensional requirements, yeah, there's no limit. So it's really just area. And on a large lot, I think this one is a 25,000 square foot lot. 25% coverage of that gives you a pretty big footprint. Plus you can have the height. So that adds up to a pretty large amount of square footage you could have when you have lots that are this size. Now, if you're in the historic district, you still can't do a flat cap on square footage, but you can take into account the massing of it and the setback of the house in relation to those around it. So there's a little bit more control there, but again, in Virginia, you can't just say every single family lot, you're capped at 5,000 square feet. It's pretty much how it works.
So is there any way to limit the massing and all the things you just said that can happen in the historic district? Can we do that anywhere else on other lots that aren't in the historic district?
No, not if it's an R10 or an R15 straight zone lot, you can't do that.
Wow. And I'll just ask one more question and then I'll move on. I saw Jen's hand. Have we heard from, I'm wondering if we've heard from any of the surrounding neighbors, I guess really even if they've had concerns about this large house, it sounds like there's not much we can do to regulate that, but have we heard from them about the secondary kitchen or any of those concerns? I don't think the council has, but maybe Planning Commission did.
There were three. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you.
Sorry, Dave. I was probably going to say the exact same thing there. We had about 3 or 4 members of the public speak at the Planning Commission public hearing. Several of the concerns seemed to be related to parking, and some of it kind of seemed like the general upkeep of the property itself. The applicant and owner of the property spoke at the public hearing, and he mentioned that he does not live there currently, but he would move into this the new house to be constructed.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Lisa.
I'm sorry, Lisa Gillerin, go ahead. Thank you.
Director of Community Development. We did hear during the Planning Commission meeting from several of the neighbors, as Michael said, who had concerns about the existing property and potential. They they had indicated that as a rental property, they definitely had concerns about it. And thus they were concerned about the potential, perhaps in the future, for this to be a rental property. And of course, that's not something that's covered by a special exception or by the town, except if it were to be either overcrowded or turned into a two-family dwelling, which would be against the zoning. But we did also hear from one of the other neighbors who lives within this immediate area, who was very concerned about the massing of the building and how large it was going to be compared to all the other one-story houses on this north side of Park Avenue. But as David has explained, we really can't control that. If it were in the historic district, then the board could look at figuring out ways to diminish the appearance of it, in the sense of making the dividing up the scale, bringing down the height a bit, breaking it up so it wouldn't look as large. But as we explained to that neighbor in this area, we can't do that. I've also heard from another one of the property owners within the same vicinity, and he voiced the same concern. He did not speak at the public hearing, though.
Thank you. But just to clarify, all that we are considering here is whether or not the second kitchen is something that we would permit. Everything else seems to be by right.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I saw Jen's hand, and then I don't think we've heard from the vice mayor, or maybe just the vice mayor, and then I see Signe has another question, or Mr. McKenna. I apologize. Okay, Jen.
Yes. So Councilmember Baker, anyway, parts of this I think have been said, but the owners that are going to build this house don't live there currently, so they've bought this property, right?
It's my understanding they own it currently and rent it out.
And they've been renting it, and then okay, so that's what's going to happen. So the renters move out, they're knocking this house down. The other thing, when you mentioned, this does sound like a really big house, and I'm very familiar with this house. It's super close to mine, and I walk by it almost every day. So when you talk about the 8,300 square feet, that's including the basement, and I feel like, and typically when we talk about square footage, we don't include the basement. So it's still a big house. I get that, but potentially it's more like a 5,000 square foot house, the way we would sort of more standard represent that. Would that be an accurate statement? Like how real estate agents, they typically talk about just the stories above ground. Is that accurate?
I think so. Maybe I'll defer to Dave or Lisa Gillerin on it, but I believe that includes the full the basement level there.
Yeah, and I know it's a bit of a tangent. It's not super. I was just curious because just to give us all a sense of the scale of this, 8,000 sounds huge, but I think in more standard parlance, I feel like we would probably describe this as a 5,000 square foot house. That's all I was trying to reference. Is that accurate?
Dave Stromberg, zoning administrator. I think you're right, Councilman Baker, that a real estate agent they usually don't consider that, the basement level part of it, as the total square footage. Here at the town, when we're evaluating these, we look at the whole thing of livable area because, again, a lot of times when you get an illegal a single dwelling unit converted to a two-family dwelling unit, it's through that basement level. So we just look at it through the whole square footage of livable area. But yeah, that's where that disconnect is.
Okay, that's fair. And then I think the one thing, given that the kitchens are going to be on the same floor, and given the unique request, the vegetarian and the non-vegetarian, this gives me some comfort that this will be used in the purpose intended, and would make it more difficult to separate it into different living spaces as opposed to on different floors when we've seen that before. So for that reason, that seems that seems really clear to me what they want to use it for, and that certainly justifies it and stays within our zoning of what our intent is. And the one other thing, just to go along with what Mr. DeCall had started to talk about, related to if they were to sell it. Of course, if the future owners also want to keep, for the same reasons, vegetarian, non-vegetarian, of course, new owners could also request that. But obviously, if you're building a big house like this, I'm assuming you want to stay in this house for a while. But certainly, future potential owners could also request an exception. Correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Does Mr. McKenna or Ms. Olam have any questions before we go back to someone who's already spoken? Sheila.
Yes. Can you just give a brief description of the difference between R10 and R15? Either of you, Michael or David, please.
Well, I guess I'll start. The R15 has a bigger front setback compared to R10, and a bigger side setback compared to R10. And the number there relates to the side yard setback. So R10 is for a 10-foot side yard setback in single family zoning district, and then R15 is for a 15-foot side yard setback. R15 typically has a 45-foot front yard setback, or R10 typically is like a 35-foot front yard setback.
Okay, thank you. And we've done several of these type situations before. The difference I see is usually when we've had second kitchens come in, it's because someone's taking care of an elderly parent and they want to have a separate living area, or they've brought in outside help. And maybe, I know we had one case where the person that was helping the family kept halal, so they needed to have a totally separate kitchen. So other than that, is there anything any different with this, and what happens with the others that we have passed over the years, with having known that you're going to have to remove this should the situation change? Either of you.
This is Dave Stromberg. I can answer that. In respect to that condition being there, that's pretty much always been there for both the accessory dwelling unit requirement and then the secondary kitchen requirement. But the accessory dwelling unit standards in the ordinance have been around since 1983. The secondary kitchen standards have only been around since, I think, 2013 or 14 was when that change was made. But for both of those instances, that condition has always been there.
Okay, so with the other ones that we've done, if the elderly parents moved on to another place, out of the house one way or the other, then you had to change it immediately. But if these individuals decide they're no longer vegetarians, they can still keep their two kitchens until they sell the house or move. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I saw Signe had another question. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, we've seen the term neighborhood conservation as a land use designation fairly often, and I'm just curious because I had the exact same response as everybody else did to the square footage. What is a neighborhood conservation land use?
This is Lisa Gillerin, Director of Community Development. The neighborhood conservation is from the comprehensive plan, and it is the land use designation for the majority of our residential neighborhoods within the town. Now, there are some residential neighborhoods who don't have that, that are not in that category, and those are the adaptive residential, which means those are places where the town would either encourage or at least consider rezoning, the ones that are adaptive. The ones that are in the conservation districts are areas where we are not looking to see an increase in density and where we would not be supportive of a rezoning that would increase density. In addition to that, there is language within the comprehensive plan, and I know that this sometimes creates confusion for people, but there is language that speaks to the fact that new infill development within those neighborhoods should be appropriate to the overall scale of the development in the area. That is something that when we've seen houses going into established neighborhoods and the houses are infill houses that perhaps do not reflect the scale architecturally or physically, and I make that difference because sometimes you can make a very big house, build a very big house, but do it in such a way that it doesn't appear overly large compared to the neighboring houses. Whenever we see infill houses that we believe are going to perhaps overpower the other houses in the neighborhood, we can comment on that, but we cannot do anything to enforce that. We can make suggestions to the builder or to the property owner who wishes to build, but it's not regulatory. It's in the comprehensive plan, so it's not regulatory. And as David said earlier, within the Commonwealth of Virginia, we cannot cap the size and make those aesthetic determinations for infill development, again, unless it is within the historic district, where there the board can look at the scale and the massing and work to diminish the overall appearance of size. Perhaps not the size itself, but at least the way the floor area is distributed, and so that it doesn't seem to overpower the neighboring properties. Does that help?
Yeah. So what you're saying is basically neighborhood conservation means maintaining the density that's currently there, if possible, without any other control over that property, except for standard zoning.
Right. As I said, there is language in there that encourages appropriate infill development that does not overpower the other buildings on the block, but it's not an enforceable regulatory language.
Okay. I spoke with one of the neighbors who lives adjacent to that property, and that person had received a letter from the community development stating that the person building the house wanted to add an extra kitchen, and the neighbor had no concerns about that at all. But when I mentioned the size, she said, that wasn't in the letter. So, but not that they could do anything about that anyway. Anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Ms. Gillerin.
Yeah, probably wasn't in the letter because it's not relevant to this decision, even though it certainly struck all of us, I think. Any other questions for staff before we move on to our next item? Okay, if you think of follow-up questions prior to the work session, feel free to send those to the town manager so that we can get those answers to us on or before next week. Let's see, our next item is going to ring a bell here. It's Resolution 20G57 to consider special exception number 2006 to permit a second kitchen accessory dwelling unit in a single-family residence at 652 Stewart Court. And once again, Michael Wallach is here for the staff report.
All right, thank you, Madam Mayor. Okay, yes, this next one here is special exception 20-06, 652 Stewart Court, for an accessory application for accessory dwelling unit to include a secondary kitchen. So this property is located within the town's R10 zoning district. The house is located there near the intersection of Stewart Court and Missouri Avenue. This next slide here is the 2020 conference map. Again, this property is located within the neighborhood conservation land use designation. To the east is some community facilities, Haley Smith Park, and then to the south, it's about 2/3 of a mile or so to the Herndon Metro Rail Station. Next slide here is just an aerial photograph showing a different view of the property there in relation to Stewart Court and Missouri Avenue. Okay, so for accessory dwelling units, they are not permitted by right. They are permitted through the special exception process. The zoning ordinance does have some occupancy requirements. Either the accessory dwelling unit or the principal dwelling must be occupied by at least one person who meets the following qualifications. The person must be at least 62 years of age or have a physical, mental, or cognitive disability. The accessory dwelling units shall not exceed 35% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, or 1,200 square feet, whichever is less. And accessory dwelling units require a minimum of one off-street parking space, and that is in addition to the parking requirements for the principal dwelling. So the proposal here, the applicant completed some interior repair work for damage that was caused by fire back in 2019. The applicant converted the existing attached garage to an accessory dwelling unit. And upon inspection by the town's building official, the owner was informed that a special exception would be needed for the interior work in order to comply with the zoning ordinance. The accessory dwelling unit includes a new bedroom, a bathroom, and a secondary kitchen. And the applicant intends to install the stovetop oven and microwave in the second kitchen upon approval of the special exception. The accessory dwelling unit totals 485.5 square feet, and the applicant's partner does meet the occupancy standards as required by the zoning ordinance, and it's his desire to age in place and have independent living quarters. There are two exterior doors located within the accessory dwelling unit. One is located in the secondary kitchen, and the other is located in the newly constructed bedroom. And then there's an interior door located within the bedroom, which connects to the family room and the rest of the house. So this is a site image. This is also the location of where the accessory dwelling unit is located. It's all on the first floor, and this is formerly the garage there where the door is. And the driveway has enough space for 3 vehicles. So this is the plan here, the special exception plan, and then the area outlined in red is the area of the accessory dwelling unit. The front of the house, which faces Stewart Court, is located on the top here, and then the rear of the house is located towards the bottom of the screen. The floor plan, it's about 12 feet wide by 40.5 feet long. That's for the accessory dwelling unit. And the accessory dwelling unit includes the remaining portion of the garage up at the top there. The applicant has stated that is to be used as storage space. And then the what's labeled here on the plan as sitting room is actually the bedroom. And then moving on down here, the bathroom would include it includes a toilet, shower, and a sink. And then down here is towards the bottom is the second kitchen. The second kitchen includes a refrigerator, dishwasher, sink, and then, as I mentioned prior, the applicant would install the microwave and an oven. So this is the layout. The sink is in the center. In the middle of the image there. So on the left wall, if you're facing the sink there, it would be the stove and microwave, which would be installed upon approval of the special exception. And then on the right wall there would be the location of the refrigerator and the exterior door as well. And that is what I have for the council this evening. Staff is recommending approval with the proposed conditions before you. And with that, I can take any questions.
So Michael, this is Lisa Merkel. So right now there is not a stove in this accessory dwelling unit, but it is wired for a stove.
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The interior work has been completed. It's my understanding that the applicant was not aware a special exception was necessary for these type of improvements. So at this point, it's my understanding that the applicant will wait on the approvals to install the stove and then the microwave.
So has the electrical work and all of that already been done for a stove? And if it was it permitted? Or was it, how was that done with, or was it done with a permit or without a permit? Or do you know? Maybe that's not relevant.
I am. Yeah. This is Dave Stromberg, zoning administrator. The building official approved all the permits required to do the fire damage repair that was in there. I think all of the plans required for this are approved, but he won't approve any inspections or final out the permits unless the special exception is approved, is where we're at now with it.
Okay. Thank you. Questions from council? Anybody? Nobody? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Moving right along, our next public hearing and final public hearing is ordinance 20063 to amend the fiscal year 2021 adopted budget. And we have Jenny Tripoli, our Director of Finance, here for the staff report.
Good evening, everyone. I think my video is not working, but hopefully you can hear me.
I can hear you just fine.
Great. This is the second budget amendment for fiscal year 2021. The biggest item on this amendment is the $2.8 million for the downtown. There's the video. For the downtown parking fund in relation to the amended comprehensive agreement with Comstock Herndon Ventures LC. And we also had a few off-cycle insurance recoveries and grants that we included in. And finally, are requesting to use a little bit of the surplus from fiscal year 20 that was not related to CARES Act funding to fund the mandatory Cisco phone system upgrade and the very popular fall cleanup. So we're looking at close to about a $3 million budget amendment. Again, the majority of that is related to the downtown, with the remainder being funded either by insurance recoveries, off-cycle grants, or a small portion of the surplus from fiscal year 20. And I am happy to take any questions related to any of those items.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tripoli. Any questions for the Director of Finance? Anybody? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much. That brings us to our general items, and the first one is also with the Director of Finance. It's Resolution 20G58, official intent to reimburse expenditures with proceeds of a borrowing, and I'm sure you will let us know what all that means.
Yes, so this is Jenny Tripoli again, Director of Finance. This is an optional reimbursement resolution that is again related to the downtown project. It gives the town council the ability, but not the obligation, to borrow funds in the future for that additional money. We've already borrowed about $1 million, but if the town council decides to borrow more to fund the rest of the project, this would allow us to reimburse ourselves from that borrowing, from that future borrowing. Again, it's not an authorization to borrow and it's not an obligation to borrow. It just gives you maximum flexibility. And so it made sense to present this at the same time as the budget amendment.
Okay. So if we pass this, we have or future councils have the option to make that the borrowing to pay it back. If we don't do this now, is it possible to do this later?
Yes.
Or do we but doing it now just has it out there so we don't have to take further action to have the ability to bond later.
And it's good for 3 years. If you pass it next week, it's good for 3 years.
Okay. And it would take additional council action to actually bond or make that borrow. It doesn't set it forth tonight. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. What other questions do we have for Jenny? None? Yes, ma'am. Sheila.
So what prompted us going ahead and doing this? Has it got anything to do with the current events of the world, or just making sure we had the access if we needed it?
It's just that, making sure we had the access if we needed it. The response was really in relation to the amended comprehensive agreement for the downtown plan and the requirement to have that appropriation done before the end of this calendar year. So it was just one more piece that makes it more flexible for this council or any sitting council over the next 3 years, depending on the timeline of that project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item from anyone? All right. Thank you so much, Jenny.
Thank you.
Our next item is Resolution 20G59, establishing the Town of Herndon's 2021 legislative program. I'll turn it over to the Town Attorney, Lisa Yates.
Good evening. Thank you. This is Lisa Yates, the Town Attorney, and I have for you this evening the proposed 2021 General Assembly legislative program for the town. And as everyone, I don't think anyone would disagree, this has been an unusual year. For many reasons, it has been an unusual year in terms of General Assembly legislative, both action and just their just the conduct of the General Assembly. As you will recall, the 2020 regular session wound up right before we slipped into COVID in early March of this year. And then in August, the General Assembly convened a special session which lasted almost 3 months and was wound up just at the beginning of last month. Now, just a few weeks away is the beginning of the 2021 General Assembly, which convenes in the second week of January. This, like the special session, will likely take place mostly virtually. It's already the short session. We have many members of the General Assembly indicating that they are going to vote to leave the session at its statutorily at its statutory limit of 30 days. We don't know whether they'll extend the extra 2 weeks or whether it'll be the short 30 days. And almost a historical limit on the number of bills that our delegates and senators can present. 7 bills for delegates and 12 bills for senators. So I'm saying all of this because this year we are adopting, as we often do, the positions and priorities of the Virginia Municipal League, which is the body that represents localities, cities, and towns throughout the state. What is before you are the positions that reflect the best interests of the towns and the cities on several of the key, on many, if not all of the key issues that we expect to come up in the General Assembly this year. So the recommendation is that the council adopt the legislative plan that has been proposed to you, which is an adoption of the Virginia Municipal League program. Even if we wanted to at this point, it's very unlikely that we would have our legislators would have the ability to carry any bills for us, but none have been put forward. So I think this program serves us well to be able to advocate with our legislators as the session begins in January. So I'm happy to answer any questions on this program or on anything that was included in my resolution or my report that went out last Friday.
Thank you. Any questions for the town attorney on the legislative agenda? It's definitely been an unusual year. Cesar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember Delago. This is all great. I don't have what we've previously proposed, so I guess my one concern is always land use and housing. So is that section proposed something new, or is that just a reaffirmation of what we've done?
It is a general support of things and legislation that is in the best interest of towns, or opposition to legislation that is not in the best interests of towns. And right now, we do not foresee a lot of land use in this coming session. There's going to be a lot of COVID-related items, a lot of budget-related items, a lot of, again, some cleanup of law enforcement issues from the special session. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, but that's fine. And then that brings me to the state assistance to local police departments. Again, same question. Is this something new, updated, or just in general, it's kind of what we're promoting? I'm just trying to get a sort of frame of reference for some of these.
This is continued. Again, the land use control, the position statement. So if you're just looking for if the position statement of the municipal league or of the town has changed, no, those position statements regarding those two items have not changed: land use or state assistance to local police departments.
So this has nothing to do with potentially people discussing defunding or impacting to our police, correct? Police department services.
As far as people discussing, you mean legislators discussing that in the General Assembly?
Correct.
If there's a bill that would not support, that somehow would defund state assistance to local departments, I think that would fall under this. And certainly, as all of the council members are aware, as the General Assembly session unfolds, it becomes a very fast and furious exchange between our legislators and my office and the manager's office of the bills, and we're forwarding them on to you on a weekly, sometimes daily basis for comment.
Yeah, I guess my and maybe it's not a question you can answer. I'm not in favor of the General Assembly passing something that may try to impose what we do within our police and how we fund that.
I think that this program, as the position of the town, has always reflected that position, council member.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm good.
Thank you. Any other questions? Signe.
So the VML has been trying to catch us up all on all the different positions that it's hoping that we will support this year. And I know Vice Mayor Olem and I both sat in on a several, and I think maybe some of the other council members did as well, discussions of the specific thing. And most of the time when VML is trying to explain to us what they are hoping that we'll support, they want us to support things that have been defunded in the past, that there was a particular relationship with the funding, specifically with the police. I guess cities were doing a land grab so that they would have tax base so they could pay for their expenditures. So the General Assembly offered instead to give funding for police, and it was a specific percentage of the funding for police. And that was cut over the years because, of course, over decades, people forget why they were doing things in the first place. And so we got a fairly interesting discussion of that. And I think a lot of those are still on the VML website. So anyone who's listening can probably go there and see what the nitty-gritty details are of those recommendations. So that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have a question for the town attorney? Was that you, Pradeep? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is, I wanted to follow up with what we discussed in our last public hearing as well. Based on, I remember what Council Member De La Guila asked. There was a question that we approved almost 1,350 housing units, and out of which there was no workforce housing except for one which came to us. And this is an important question in a situation we are going through. We are talking about workforce housing, but we are not legally allowed to ask, if I understand it correctly. So is there any way we can probably send our position? I don't know how other council members feel about it, but not being able to ask questions about workforce housing is definitely a difficult situation I personally am going through. So is it possible to, through the legislative items that interest us, we can probably influence our lawmakers in Richmond to probably bring a bill that will allow us in future to ask this kind of questions, because we've had, we will have more applications coming, and we already had so many applications that we approved, but in none of those we were able to ask questions about the workforce housing. Is there any way we can change this situation, or at least be a catalyst for the change? This question is for Madam Town Attorney.
So to put this in context, the condition that you want to exist existed several years ago before the General Assembly took on proffer reform and adopted legislation that we currently have to operate under, where the proffers have to be voluntary and you cannot ask an applicant for a certain thing or amount of money. So this that legislation just went into effect less than 5 years ago, or about 5 years ago. I would, it may be unlikely to expect that the General Assembly would be willing to take this up again to return it back to proffer law, back to where it was prior to, 2014 through 2016. So I'd be happy to discuss that with you or any other council member who'd like to discuss the specifics of proffer legislation. But I will tell you that that is something that I'm not sure that the General Assembly would be willing to take up. In fact, I doubt they would be willing to take up in the way that you want them to permit something that they just recently prohibited.
I understood. Thank you. Thank you for the explanation. And obviously, what they take or they do not take is beyond our control. So what we can control is at least we can show our interest, or at least, what we are looking for, because we're talking about the workforce housing. But if we are not even in a position to ask, then there is no point of talking, because every single time it's not going to fall into our hands like the one proposal came. So if there is anything we can do to talk about it. And another question is also, maybe it's not related here, and maybe I can ask this question, we can discuss it offline. But my question is, based on what we discussed in our last public hearing, correct me if I heard wrong, but I heard that to ask the workforce housing was too late, versus what I knew before, or what I understood before, was we're not allowed to ask. So not allowed to ask is one position, but it's too late was a different position. So that's why I was very confused. So maybe this is not a question pertains to the legislative interest. We're taking our position here. But again, I do not know how the rest of the council thinks about, but I would strongly advocate taking our position that we want to be in a position to at least talk about the workforce housing when this kind of application come to us again.
Councilmember DeCall, that was a great question. Your question and your desire to know more about that subject matter is very good and very appropriate. And I would love to take a deep dive into that with you. If you'd like to give me a call, we can sit down with. I'll even invite, Lisa Gillerin and some other staff in if you want to discuss that. I'd be happy to do that. But I will tell you that any bills moving forward right now, as I said, they're limited, very limited. It is something that perhaps would be more appropriate next session.
Well,
we're certainly asking the question about the other council.
And I was actually, I'm sorry. I was talking to Delegate Samira a few days before, and he was mentioning to me that if we discuss and if we show our interest, then, he would certainly take that forward. Just wanted to let the council know.
So I agree with the town attorney that this is a great question, and proffers are super complicated, and I share your frustration. When this bill passed a few years back, it was very strongly opposed by almost every jurisdiction. And the town attorney and I happened to be in Richmond, and I testified at the subcommittee about it, and it's still unanimously passed. So I think that it is an uphill battle, but it's one worth discussing. And the legislature does look different now than it did then. So maybe there's a chance in the future for that. Mr. De Aguila.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember De Aguila. I think you took the sentiments from me. It is a different General Assembly today than it was 5 years ago. And just because something seems unlikely or impossible, I share Councilmember DeCall's commitment and conviction. It's upon us that really believe in this to fight the good fight. And if we lose, so be it. But I hear that it might be tough or futile, but I stand beside my fellow council member, and I'll fight the good fight and go down fighting it. I think it's absolutely paramount that we address this and make this a serious, not just town issue, but a regional issue, and one that really is impacting the rest of the country. So I'm with you, Councilmember DeCall, and I'll certainly make sure our delegate knows about this.
I cannot remember now who's asked questions. Is there anybody who hasn't asked a question that has one? And then I'll circle back. Mr. McKenna.
Yeah, just to follow up on Mr. DeCall and Mr. De Aguila's statement, I do agree with them. And I guess the question for me in regards to this is, obviously what I think what's being asked of by council to you and what should be done are kind of separate, but at the same time very important. This basically what my question to you is, these actions that we have to go to the legislature are edicts or just basic outlines versus very specific things, which we can bring up with our representatives, i.e. either at the state level or at the county level in regards to that. Would that be correct?
That's correct. There are many different things. We don't know what's going to come up specifically. We want to have positions that allow the town to pivot as necessary.
Sure. Okay, great. And then also, there was a Planning Commission Affordable Housing seminar on the September 5th, 2018 that had Tom Fleetwood, who runs the Housing Authority in the county, along with Sean Reagan, who is on the Planning Commission at the time. It might be good to go back and review that, because there is some very good information in regards how we can move forward with that. So that might be something to consider as well. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else who hasn't spoken yet? And I can't remember who that is, so I'll just call on Signe.
Okay, so Ms. Yates shared with us a report on proffered cash payments and expenditures, which I found very interesting, although disturbingly low on specific information. But one thing I did find was that of all of the different proffers that localities have asked for and received in the past year or so, I think this is just the past year, only 3% had to do with affordable housing and 0% had to do with special needs housing. And that's statewide. So there's obviously a really strong disincentive, or maybe people don't want to have affordable housing. But I support what all of the other council members have said, that we should be pushing our legislators to move us out of this position into a position where we can speak freely at the very least. I mean, if somebody's not going to proffer, affordable housing, that's fine. But the fact that we can't even say anything to them about it leads us to the position we're in now, where our town manager is overjoyed that people have come to us and said they want to do it with us. So even if it's futile, I agree, we need to do it. And I would also add, we need to also have some requirement in there for real estate agents to discuss the historic preservation districts, or I've lost the term anymore. I know that those have always been considered lost causes, that we are, but the fact that we don't even bring it up anymore just shows we've kind of given in, and I reject that. So if other people agree, I would like to also add the historic district request. In other words, so when you move into a historic district, that you have to sign something that says, I know this is a historic district.
That does, I will say, Councilmember Friedrichs, this is Lisa Yates speaking, that does exist currently. You do sign a affidavit that you know that you're moving into a historic district, that it's a personal responsibility for you to verify whether or not there are regulations regarding the historic district.
Is that new? Is that new? Because we've discussed this a lot.
Yeah, no, I moved in. When I moved in, I had to sign that. It is what is currently, I can get you a copy of one to look at. When we took this to the General Assembly back in 2017, I want to say it might have been 2016. That was what the real estate agents lobby pointed to, was that this was already allowed, and the things in the state code were not of the sort of things that they felt like historic district should be added. That was viewed as a desirable thing, not an undesirable thing, like a landfill or a certain other conditions are contained there.
So what have we been discussing all these years if people already have to sign that when they get into historic district? Because
they sign that they are going to take their due diligence to they understand that they may be in historic district, that they have to do due diligence. Sometimes people don't do that. I would say that it has been in effect for maybe 7 years at the most.
Am I in some different? I really believed, maybe Jen has the answer, but I really believe that we've been discussing this and complaining about it. What's the right answer, Jen?
Well, no, Signe, you're right. I think we wanted more than that. I think that's the discrepancy, is all I would add. So that's been in place, but I think what we've asked for is more. That's how I would define it.
Thanks for that. Mr. Town Manager. Yes.
There were two issues that we were confronted. One is what is the town attorney is describing is more of a passive, do your due diligence. I'm signing here to say I'm going to do my due diligence to check in on this. It's not you are in a district right in front of your face. So that's number one. We wanted something that's a little more upfront. Second item is because the county has historic districts, that on the land record, our historic district would often appear as no. And we couldn't get that changed in the county system, but we did get them to put in a disclaimer saying if you live in an incorporated town, please check with your town as to whether or not this property resides in one of their historic districts. But with it saying no in the county record, you have a passive go check for yourself, and then you look at the county land record and it says no, then you think you're not. So that's where the confusion was. So we've done some work with the county. You have this passive way. We're trying to get it done every way we can, but there are still some problems because it still requires a certain amount of motivation on the homeowner's side.
This is this has changed everything for me, but okay. So
can I bring us back to what we're looking at here is the legislative agenda that is before us. And it sounds like there are people on the council who would like to push further about learning more about proffers and reform and what may be possible. There was some discussion at the one of our last meetings about the next council. There are going to be 3 new members of council, and the town attorney has said she's interested and willing to deep dive into the ins and outs of proffers, which are super complicated. So I don't know if I'm out of line in suggesting this, but maybe that is item for the next council to take up and really learn about and be ready for at the next session. Certainly our delegate is aware that we have members of council that are interested in this. I don't think that'll be a surprise to him. He could put it forward without us formally requesting it. But the council next year could be in a great position to really make that argument fully if there's a, time spent on it before this time next year. So it sounds like if the town attorney is telling us that there's not a lot of capacity for bills to go forward right now because they're so, did I mishear that? I mean, they have.
No,
okay.
you did not. However, I am willing to ask again. I have been told no, that there's not. And I have been told by others in authority in the General Assembly that there are no exceptions
to having additional bills.
Maybe that will change as the session develops. But I'm certainly willing to go ahead and make that request of our legislators.
Okay.
If we know what we want.
I don't think we've heard from the vice mayor.
Yes, I was just going to say, for numerous years, I have attempted to get what Councilmember Friedrichs was talking about, the disclosing at closing that you were buying in a historic district. But I do believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Town Attorney, I believe the thing that is now signed, I would sign it, and I don't live in a historic district. I would sign the same piece of paper that says, I need to do my due diligence to see whether, because I think they made it part of the complete package when you buy. So everyone gets that form. So if you get that form, it's not going to make a light bulb go off necessarily, unfortunately. Is that correct?
And that may be true. I don't know who gets it.
I believe everyone.
What section is in the state? What section it is in the state code that requires it? And it's not a required disclosure of agents. It's a required disclosure at closing.
Right. But I too have heard the same thing, and I've talked to a couple of legislators, and they were saying we're limited. We can't take much to Richmond. So with the COVID going on, I agree that we need to work on putting a really good package together.
So is the only way to get our legislators to put forth a bill for us is to have it in our legislative agenda, or can the mayor or council members request that on their own? And I'm only asking because of the timeliness. I mean, I think this legislative agenda needs to be passed before January.
It does.
Am I wrong? Or could it be passed in January?
Well, as I have been outlining in my communications, the last day to submit bills was yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the legislators would know whether, there was something that could be done beyond that, but I did not receive any requests. I can think of three communications.
So are we looking to add something to this agenda tonight, to this legislative agenda, or I'm trying to get a sense of what we're trying to accomplish? So I saw Cesar and Pradeep's hand. So who would like to, or maybe you're not going to answer that question, but.
I'm a little disappointed that this is a day late when I think we've been kind of communicating the importance of some of these items. I'm a little bit confused why we would be told that there's no room or ability when we speak to our delegate, we're getting an open invitation. And that to me signifies that we can pretty much ask to have something put on there. I don't know who's telling you we can't or we shouldn't, but that's not how I think these things work.
Well, we certainly can if we can articulate what that is to add it for next week.
So, and I think we've been trying to communicate that for quite a time now. So obviously, there's questions around the historic district, but definitely we've been trying to get some sort of path through this block that we have when it comes to workforce affordable proffers. So I would certainly like that. And maybe some of the folks that weren't in favor of it in previous years can help me understand why we don't have that. I understand apparently now we have a majority. Maybe the folks that didn't support it have the cons to it, but that would be my request, to make sure we articulate that we do want that ability to even ask to, or even start the discussion, because that is where the negotiation starts in terms of, what we want to do and how we want to address this housing issue.
And I would certainly like some direction on that. If asking in the written format, as I've done since I've been at the town, is not the correct way to do that. Normally, I would get direction from an individual council member, specific direction and wording from an individual council member or from the group about a general idea that they want specifically put forward to the General Assembly, or a specific type of bill. I can think of many occasions, even last year, when specific things were requested and sent to the manager's attention or my attention.
Madam Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I do not have a question. I have a comment. I think if we're going to put together a legislative package, we need to be working on it in advance. I know over the years that's what I've done. I don't think workforce housing, that we need to be waiting on the General Assembly to do something. We have been working on things as far as zoning goes in this community, in this town of Herndon, for several years, as we are looking at areas that we have looked at rezoning and making sure that we're not going to lose our workforce affordable housing as these older areas do redevelop. And we have something right here on the agenda tonight that we talked about, and we can see the Falls Church coming to the town of Herndon if individuals come in and buy the little houses and turn them into huge houses that are going to be much more expensive and beyond the workforce person's purview. So I do think the town we have, as a body, been working on that. But getting it paid for on our small areas, I think we need to get people to get into some education on how that works. I know I've been to numerous seminars at the Virginia Municipal League. They do an awesome job at talking about these things and how other communities are doing it. Fairfax County is working very hard, and if you look all around us, I've been to numerous events over the last year or two put on by the Chamber, the Committee for Dulles, talking about what is going on in our surrounding area. And I've offered to send people copies of that. And I'm always willing to sit and talk to people. I go to a lot of these things. So I know the town attorney knows more about the specifics and the nitty-gritty, as well as all of our planning staff. But when we put in a small 6-house development, there's not much we're going to be able to get on workforce housing with that. That's all.
So we've gotten multiple communications from the town attorney and her dispatch about the legislative agenda and many other items, including affordable housing and proffers and all of that. And I'm hearing that no one has submitted a specific agenda item to place on here. Sounds like there's some interest in that. So I would suggest that Councilmember DeLaguila and DeCall, who have been kind of the spearheaders tonight, if you have language that you would like to submit to the town attorney to send out to council to for us to consider next week adding to this legislative agenda, I think that's legitimate. I think that in addition to, or maybe instead, spending time next term with a largely new council, diving into this and making it a priority, I think could be powerful. And the question about people who are against affordable housing, I don't think any of those people are any longer on the council. There was a time when we couldn't even get a majority to discuss it, and we are no longer there, obviously. So, Mr. DeCall, did you have a comment? You're on mute.
Just, Madam Mayor, this is Councilman DeCall. So, my ask here is, as Madam Town Attorney mentioned, the last day to put anything as a bill was yesterday. Is that correct?
That is pursuant to the General Assembly calendar.
General Assembly calendar. Okay.
Now,
so my ask to the staff would be, the first thing is, let's have this discussion, especially, the legislative interest work session before, because the last day was yesterday and we are having this discussion today. Obviously, we are showing our interest in the bill, but if you want to influence certain things to go in the bill, I think it makes sense to have this meeting at least a week or 2 weeks before that deadline. First thing my ask would be that, so that, we'll be more prepared. Second thing, we mentioned our interest here that we love to have the discussion about the workforce housing. Obviously, we are council members. We are not legal authority. So rather than Councilmember De La Guila or Councilmember DeCall coming up with the language, can we ask town attorney to come up with the language that we can recommend or send as our interest? Obviously, we can always review that and send it to Richmond.
So, Madam Mayor, if I could
certainly
respond to the council member. You're absolutely correct, Council Member DeCall. And if you will recall, typically we have our legislative programs. I start asking in August, typically, and we usually get them in October. This year, again, with COVID, we had a slow start. We also had a special session going on up until November. And as you recall, we only had one meeting last month and the one meeting this month. So I do apologize. That is why I put out the alerts. The bills, I do need an idea, more than just a philosophical idea, but generally an idea of specifically what it is we're trying to change about the state law when we put forward a bill. The bill is written sometimes by myself, and then it is given to legislative services, who writes it, who tweaks it even further. In this particular case, I believe that possibly, what council is trying to do and wants to do with regard to what you've said is workforce housing can occur, but we need to do some educational training about how that's done, how we lay the framework to do that, and how to get that going ahead of time. And there are certain things that we just can't do because we don't have a housing authority, like a city or a county. So I hope that helps you understand some of your questions. That's all, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I think it's also important to recall that until October, we were confined to only talking about items related to the global pandemic emergency, which put a delay on our timeline for many things, which is why our meeting went until almost 1 a.m. last week. So again, I would implore our council members to talk with our town attorney and provide some guidance to see if there's something to add as an addendum next week. And if that is on the table, we can consider it next week. And if it's not, it looks like there's a plan for diving deep next term and really getting into that for the next General Assembly session. So are there any other questions on this item? Great. The next item, I believe, is, let me see, number 9, a resolution to authorize the Chief of Police to sign a Northern Virginia Critical Incident Response Team Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, allowing the Herndon Police Department to participate in mutual aid throughout the Northern Virginia region. And I believe, oh, there she is. We have the Chief here with us for the staff report. Good evening, Chief.
Good evening. How are you all doing? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. I appreciate your time, Madam Mayor and Town Council. This is a project that we in the Northern Virginia Chiefs have been working on for over 12 months, really. We started this concept before any of 2020 became a reality. So our goal in this was to put together a team of experienced and capable detectives to investigate critical incidents such as police shootings, use of force incidents that result in death, and those types of things. It's a way for us ultimately to make sure that these are done independently without bias, which has really been one of the outcries of the police reform as we've seen across the country that's happening. We were ahead of that. Here in Herndon, it's a little different because we have been dependent on an outside entity to investigate our incidents, but we have been dependent on Fairfax County Police to do that. There have been a few problems with that, not with the way they've done the investigation. They certainly served us very well, but we've had no MOUs in place. Certainly, if they had multiple incidents going on, they may not be available for us, depending on what's going on in the county. This MOU is really a collective effort to ensure that all of our jurisdictions have the same support, and that not only will all of the jurisdictions get that independent, that are part of this, get that independent, unbiased, and objective investigation into these incidents, which is important for public perception as well. It also allows us to be part of that investigative team where we would go to other jurisdictions and participate in those investigations, which develops expertise within our own agency here that we can use to put back into place here. We still have some issues to work out with operationally, but the important thing is that we have conceptualized, we have worked with the town attorneys and city and county attorneys on this. They've collectively talked about the MOU and worked out the issues. The Commonwealth attorneys were involved that had the jurisdictions involved. But this is the police chiefs have decided this is how we want to do the investigations, no matter where that investigation is done. Wherever that critical incident happens, the Commonwealth attorney for that jurisdiction will still prosecute it. Whether we do the investigation ourselves, whether Fairfax does it, whether the CERT team does it, or the Virginia State Police, it still will be prosecuted by the sitting Commonwealth attorney in those jurisdictions. We have just decided it's in our best interest collectively to come up with a team that will work under the same MOU with the same procedures and guidelines, working these throughout the jurisdictions. This is very common in some parts of the country. Now, the one thing that I will tell you, Alexandria was initially on board, has pulled out only temporarily. They are working through some changes over there. Their police chief assures us that they will likely be back on board once they get time to bring it to their city council, but it was not going to happen until sometime in the early spring. We have been sitting on this for a while. We did not want to wait, because we think this is important to initiate as quickly as possible so that we get a process in place. And any other jurisdiction that would like to join after coming on, after we get it operationalized, we certainly can have them sign on to the MOU and be part of this. Some of the jurisdictions do not have to go before their city or county or boards to get it approved. So they're ready to go. There's a few of us that we thought it was best to bring it to your attention and have you put an approval on it. So you understood what we were doing and why. We just don't have the resources to investigate things ourselves at this level, despite the people that we have brought in the door recently. The last thing I will mention about this is that you may notice that Fairfax County is not involved in this. They have chosen not to participate. I cannot give you an answer as to why. My personal opinion is it's a shame because they have tremendous resources and experience at the detective level who could add to this MOU. I do believe in the future they are undergoing a change in leadership here in the very near future. They are their current chief is retiring and they will be looking for a new chief. And I do expect that the next leadership will likely join on board. Their resources are very important to this team, but I do feel very comfortable with the number of jurisdictions and the expertise that are already on this team now that these investigations will be done in an exemplary manner. And I'll be happy to take any questions from any of you that you may have about this.
Thank you, Chief. What questions do you have? Madam Vice Mayor.
This is the Vice Mayor speaking. Thank you for joining us tonight, Chief. So the only thing that's going to change is in the past, you would reach out and Fairfax County would help you, but there was no MOU showing specifically how things were going to happen. So this is going to give you some control over how things will happen with these other jurisdictions.
Yeah, and I had just kind of an informal working relationship with Fairfax on that, but that's not good enough because, the last shooting we had, for example, we had it captured on body camera. There was literally no questions about the need for it and how it happened and how it unfolded. But should you have a questionable one, things may change when somebody else is looking at it. This puts the guidelines in place. It gives me control. If a shooting happens in Herndon, it still gives me control over communicating with my community. It gives me control over when to release information, whether I should release an officer's name, whether I should release a video or not release a video. And every chief will still have those options and that control. But the actual investigation will be looked at by independent eyes. We will have a liaison to that investigative team. But if it happens in Herndon, my investigators will not be doing the actual investigation of that incident.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Did I see Sydney?
Thank you, Chief. So I'm a little confused about the cost issue. You're saying that our guys will investigate other people's incidents, and according to the MOU, each group that's doing something pays its own people. So if we're sending somebody out to Loudoun County or wherever it is we're sending them, we'll be paying for them to go out there and do the investigation, and they'll be paying for the resources. Is that correct?
So we pay our own person. This is really nothing but personnel costs. So if they're on duty, they just go and they're on duty. If it creates overtime, it creates overtime. But just keep in mind, if we have an incident here, other people are paying their personnel costs to work my incident just as we would send ours there. Keep in mind that we will only have at max 2 to 3 people from Herndon on this team, period. So you're talking about a very small number of people from our jurisdiction based on size that will even be committed to this team.
Okay, and all of the documents will be retained by the original jurisdiction, right?
Yeah, I think that's in the MOU. We actually had that put into the MOU.
Yeah. Okay, so that means that no independent organization will keep those documents and be able to refer to them separately from our
all FOIA requests, all requests for information go through the agency where the incident occurred.
Okay. And I don't understand what the Garrity advisement issue is in the MOU. It says that it's not a Garrity advisement situation. Does that mean that, because the Garrity advisement says that you can be quiet, you can be silent, but your silence has meaning. Why would that not carry on through when we're doing cross jurisdictional.
They do, Carrie. I'm just trying to see where you're referring to that in here as and how it's worded in here.
Yeah, there are a couple places.
Lisa, do you have it in front of you, Lisa Yates? I mean, the same protections to the officers apply no matter who's investigating. Those same protections apply. The officer does not have to answer questions if it's a criminal investigation. We would always still do our own internal affairs investigation, regardless of who is doing the criminal investigation. The same thing happened when Fairfax came over here and investigated our officer. That officer could make a decision that night not to talk to Fairfax County. And chose not to do that. And certainly we're not going to question him under any IA type of questioning until the criminal investigation is over. But the officer always has a right not to answer questions, and that is their right, when their criminal investigation is being conducted.
Okay.
That won't change. That does not change. That law does not change.
So our guys are still protected.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Trust me, every chief was interested in making sure that we not only, had the same protections in place for our officers, but that we had control of not the investigation, but, the information attached to the investigation and how it would be communicated or what would be released. Because nobody knows the Herndon community like I know it. So I have to make the decision if I think a video needs to get out or I think it really is harmful for me to send it out. So those kind of things went into those kind of discussions we had as chiefs over the course of the last 12 months. We wanted to remain in control of those types of release, in control of the information. But we are not controlling the actual investigation. It's important that we don't have control over the investigation itself.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Other questions for the chief or comments? Cesar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Lago. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that info. Just to clarify, the county not being active doesn't in any way take away from what support they may give us, correct? I mean, it hasn't been formalized in these terms. They're still going to engage if we need them.
If we need them, absolutely. Oh, yeah. They have not in any way said that they're not going to help us. They always will. But we will start, once this becomes operationalized, we're envisioning maybe March 1st. Timeframe is what we're shooting for because we got some SOPs to work out as far as logistics of the call outs and how we'd handle that and the team members. The other thing is there will be training for all the team members before they ever put this into operation. But yes, anytime I need the county for something, they absolutely will still be there to help us.
And again, I read that and I heard that and I understood that there's really no exposure. What I'm hearing that you can identify at this point for them not being active with us at this point. And if there's anything we can do to lobby certain people in leadership in the county, we're certainly willing to do that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. At this point, I think it's best to let new leadership get in place. And then, the Nova Chiefs will address them. We think it's important that they hear from us. And I think most chiefs would like to be part of this. And again, part of it is selfish for me because I know the people they have on the ground. I know the resources. I know the experience that they bring to the table as part of this team. And having them part of that team, is very helpful to the rest of this CERT team. Honestly, I'll be honest with you. I came from the county, but oftentimes the county doesn't think they need anybody else's help. And truly the county doesn't need the help of this team, but this team would provide a level of transparency to the county, which I think is important to the citizens. That is not my call to make. That will be future leadership's call to make. We see the value of having them a part of this team just from the resource and experience standpoint.
No, I appreciate that. And come March or in the future, we'll remind them that partnerships go and flow two ways. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Chief, when and if Fairfax County decides to be a part of this, it would be an amendment or addendum to the MOU and come back before council to readopt?
Yeah, I don't know if we have to come back before council to put a signing body on. That would be a question for Lisa Yates because we do expect Alex to jump on here in the spring. We just didn't want to continually put this off because of political issues going on in different jurisdictions when we had something ready to roll.
Makes sense. This sounds like a great step that will just expedite the resources that are already here with a formalized process for how to get it started right away. And I think it's great. I'm glad you guys have worked on this. Other questions or comments for the chief? All right. Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too. And the next item is Resolution 20G60 to authorize project applications to NVTA for CMAQ funding and RSTP funding for fiscal year 2027, and to endorse the town's transportation projects included in VDOT's 6-year improvement plan. So I think we are asking for free money is the short version of the staff report. I'll recognize Mark Dusman, who's our transportation program manager, for the staff report, and I think he is dialing in this evening without video. Mr. Dusman, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great,
thank you,
we're ready for you.
Well, thank you. And thank you, members of Town Council. This is Mark Dusman, Transportation Program Manager. Staff is proposing to submit to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, or NVTA, a regional surface transportation funding application and also a congestion mitigation air quality funding application. RSTP and CMAQ are federal funding programs for fiscal year 2027. The two transportation projects include Sterling Road multimodal improvements with a RSTP funding request of up to $1 million, and the Herndon Metro Rail intermodal access improvements phase 2 with a CMAQ funding request of up to $700,000. The town typically receives a total RSTP CMAQ funding of approximately $1 million to $1.6 million per year. And RSTP CMAQ funding applications are primarily based on jurisdiction population, and the approved allocation to the town fluctuates each year depending on the total federal RSTP CMAQ funds directed to the Northern Virginia region and the number of submitted projects. So although the town may not get the full funding request desired, the RSTP CMAQ program does provide a strategy to establish funding for a new project or to accumulate additional funds. So the Sterling Road Multimodal Improvement Project is a new RSTP funding application. The project length is approximately 1 mile, located between Eldon Street and the town limits, and includes the Herndon Parkway, Crestview Drive, and Eldon Street intersections, and will likely include coordination of planning and funding with Loudoun County to include the Rock Hill Road intersection too. The initial concept planning efforts are now underway, utilizing up to $204,000 of existing NVTA funding, referred to as NVTA local revenue, as listed in the town's capital improvement program. The concept planning phase now happening includes right-of-way survey, followed by proposed roadway design concepts and its traffic impact analysis. And as part of the traffic analysis, a signal word evaluation is also being prepared to determine the future need for a new signalized intersection at Crestview Drive. And the concept design is also to include proposed bike lanes as part of the project, as per the town's adopted bike plan. And staff and the town's consultant are planning to present the concept design plans to PVAC, Planning Commission, and at Town Council, and particularly at public outreach meetings, hopefully during the summer of next year, and of course, depending on COVID circumstances. And so the project objective is to implement applicable multimodal measures, such as the proposed bike lanes and possibly a future connector route, and to improve traffic signalization, applicable turning lanes, provide for landscaping, and safer ADA accessible sidewalks, all in an effort to increase the safety, reduce congestion, enhance circulation and connectivity, but the key is to retain the residential character of the Sterling Road corridor. So it's going to be quite the balancing act to achieve everything. And as previously stated, town staff is requesting up to $1 million. However, the project estimate ranges from $8 million to $14 million, depending on the final approval of the concept design and the potential impact on right-of-way and any utility relocation costs. So over the next several years, as the project details and the final cost estimate is better defined, the funding objective will be to use the federal RSTP funds as a foundation and in support and funding leverage towards when the town submits future VDOT state and NVTA regional transportation funding applications. In order to accumulate enough funding to implement the project during the latter part of the next decade, likely at around fiscal year 27 in 28, 29, 30 timeframe. The next project is the Herndon Metro Rail Intermodal Access Improvement Project, and its fiscal year 27 CMAQ funding request of up to $700,000 to be directed towards future Phase 2 improvements that are needed beyond the initial bus bay drop-off improvements of Phase 1, of which construction is to start during the first half of next year. So specifically, Phase 2 funding is to be directed towards a new signalized intersection at the future Worldgate Drive extension with Herndon Parkway, as per the town's adopted Herndon Metro Rail station area plan. And in addition, pedestrian signalization and street lighting, along with ADA accessible sidewalks, curb cuts, the crosswalks, the refuge islands, are all part of the design that was adopted back in December 2016, as shown here on slide 5. During the past 2 years, the town has previously approved the submittal of CMAQ project applications to fund the town's Metro Rail Access Phase 2 improvements, of which the town has accumulated at this time $650,000. However, the project estimate is at $1.9 million and may need to be adjusted again depending on right-of-way and utility relocation costs. So over the next several years, as town staff better defines the final cost estimate, the funding objective will be to use the federal CMAQ funds and support and funding leverage towards when the town submits future VDOT state and NVTA regional transportation funding applications to accumulate enough funding to also implement the project during the latter part of next decade. And the other challenging part is to obtaining funds for the remaining part, the Worldgate Drive extension itself, the elbow portion. And so staff anticipates that having established funding for the intersection will then provide a good foundation for when the town applies for that, and in concert too with the adjoining property owners, the staff anticipates public-private partnership to try to fund that elbow. And staff recommends approval of the resolution which authorizes the RSTP CMAQ funding application for fiscal year 2027 and endorse the town's existing transportation projects as listed in the town's resolution, which are also listed in VDOT's 6-year improvement program. And that concludes staff's report and open to any questions.
Thank you. Let me get back to my grid screen so I can see everybody. What questions do you have for Mr. Duesman? Anybody? Signe.
Mr. Duesman, I'm interested in the proposal. I mean, obviously I support asking for this funding, but how are we going to decrease congestion on Sterling Road when it's starting to get, I mean, we're not able to widen it. We're not able to stop, people from using it as a cut through. So is it just signalization that's going to make it less signalization and turn lanes that's going to improve the traffic flow?
Well, likely and this is based on the traffic analysis, is the capacity improvements will happen at the intersections, particularly at Herndon Parkway and Sterling intersection. There likely may be some capacity improvements. When I refer to capacity improvements, I'm referring to additional turning lane movements or extending the queuing lanes.
Okay.
And as well as Eldon Street and Sterling too, there's opportunity for capacity improvements. And again, referring to extending queuing lanes, potentially turning lane improvements. But when that type of thinking comes up, then it sometimes impacts right-of-way. And of course, then that impacts the funding and the cost estimate. So, and that's what I'm working with the consultant now, is to try to get an idea of the impact on right-of-way, because typically that's where the major costs, these projects usually increase because of the right-of-way costs and the underlying utility relocation and all that. So, no, the sections between the roadway between the intersections, well, the capacity improvements, well, for that matter, the whole project relates to the multimodal element of the project, where is by establishing the potential for a transit route, having the bike lanes to increase, to get people out of their cars and hence reduce congestion.
Okay, so the increased capacity will be non-car capacity.
Right, and to reduce congestion. So that's the general thinking.
Thank you. I appreciate it, sir.
Thank you. And Mr. Duesman, this is in the CIP, correct? This project is something that we've discussed in the CIP, so we can look for details there. And if anybody has additional questions, I'm sure staff's available to answer those. Other questions about this funding or application? Anybody? Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Mark. Our last general item is Resolution 20G63 to authorize the town manager to sign a second federal subaward agreement between the town and Fairfax County for the use of additional CARES funds. And I think this is once again Jenny Tripoli, Director of Finance, for the staff report.
Oops. It is. Hello again. This is Jenny Tripoli, Director of Finance. So this item came up very last minute. As you may know, the State Corporation Commission has governed what municipal utilities can do with regard to turnoffs during the pandemic. The state also received a share of CARES funding, and I think what they're trying to do is allocate some of that funding specifically to help utility customers. Our benefit, which would go to our customers in this situation, is maybe $80,000, could possibly be as much as $100,000. It's impacting only those customers that are either 30 days to 59 days past due or 60 plus days past due as of October 31st because of the CARES funding spending deadlines. In order to receive this money from the state, we have to partner with the county to be our fiscal agent to get it. The question might be, why do we need another $100,000 when we had $4.2 million? This is a little bit different because very specifically, CARES money cannot be used to replace revenue. However, I think the way that this is potentially being interpreted, and again, the guidance from this keeps changing, is the guidance from the state for this particular municipal utility relief portion of the CARES funding, is that we pay money to provide water and we pay money to have the sewer processed. And so I almost view this as an expense offset, but the customer's accounts would be credited or, given the benefit of that. This would not cover the recycling fees that we bill through the water bills, just because we do that as a convenience to bill people. That's not a utility function. It wouldn't cover the lateral replacement fee, which is 50 cents a quarter. It would just be water and sewer fees and charges. We may get none of this money. We may get some of it, but it's one of those things where if a second subaward agreement comes out, it would have to be signed between now and December 30th. With possibly some room in January to sign it. And so again, we just wanted to have the maximum flexibility and to inform you that this could be coming, and to get your authorization to have the town manager sign this should it indeed come through.
Awesome. Thank you. Questions or comments from council? I think this is great. Signe.
Would the customers be in any way obliged to pay it back at any time?
I don't believe so. With the CARES funding, it's once it's allocated, the only way the money gets paid back to the feds is if we fail the audit, which I've worked very hard to make sure we don't.
Then this is just great. I am totally in favor. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. Any other comments or questions? Okay, great. So I would like to propose that we move items 7, 10, and 11 to our consent agenda for next week. That's...
Yeah, Mrs. Olam, I would concur with that.
Okay, are there any other items anybody would like to also move? I'm open to suggestions. Okay, great. So we will do that. Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. Are there any questions from council on the items that are already on the consent agenda, which are as an HVAC maintenance contract, to ratify a second extension of a license, and a second extension of a contract for prosecutorial services? Anybody? Nope. Okay. That brings us to roundtable. Who would like to start us off? Signe.
Can depend on me to start us off.
I appreciate that.
So I have a question for the town manager, or maybe it's for the town attorney. Are we able to have interns from, say, George Mason University do work for us sorry, cats everywhere.
It's not a cat, is it? It's going to be an actual person?
No, it's totally... No, and the reason I ask this is there are a number of things that I think might be interesting to students of planning, graduate students, or geography students. For example, mapping where we have affordable housing, mapping, canvassing to find out information that we might want to know. Can we use interns for that, or is there some legal reason not to?
This is Bill Ashton, town manager. My understanding of the Fair Labor Standards Act, has been explained to me by the HR director, is that if your intern is doing anything meaningful for you as an employer, meaning they're providing you a valuable service that you can use, it is not for their education, but it is for your betterment, you have to pay them. Is my understanding correct, Madam Town Attorney?
It is, and that comes out of a line of federal court cases probably about 10 or 15 years ago. Certainly we can talk to you more offline about that, but we, the town does not use that interns for that reason unless it's a very specific situation that it doesn't fall into the category that the town manager was just talking about.
So,
well, then the question is, then why wouldn't we then pay them? Because that would not. I mean, if we're using an intern, we're not obligated to pay. Unless we're using them full time, we're not obligated to pay them all the different benefits and so forth. But they still do get the benefit because they're learning about their subject matter on the ground, sort of a truthing version. But I interrupted you. What were you going to say, Bill?
No, we have used interns in the past, and we paid them. When I was the IT director, I had 2 interns that we brought in that we did pay, and they provided some incredible services for us. And they did learn, and they're ultimately going on to study IT in their future careers. The only thing is right now with temporary season, though, be considered like a temporary seasonal part-time flex sort of work. Because of COVID, we put a strong restriction on the hiring of anybody.
Right, but in the future, this is something we could do or return to.
We can certainly discuss, yes.
And the reason is that I ask this is there are so many things that I'd like to know that I don't think our staff has the time to research and figure out, such as how many workforce housing units should we be trying to add to our stock? Mm-hmm. Should we just add affordable housing wherever we can, or should we pick a number like Fairfax County did when they did their task force? And then in order to pick a number of units, we need to know how many units exist. And there are just a number of things that I think it might be helpful for us to do in the future. I don't know if people have any thoughts on that, but I'm specifically, every time we get together, we moan and groan about not having enough affordable housing, but we don't really say how much affordable housing we want to have. And that's something that I think we should be figuring out before we try and passively convince people to give us proffers without actually asking them to give us proffers. So that was one of my thoughts, is use interns for more sort of informational and research-oriented things, and figure out what our target number of affordable housing units should be, which shouldn't be too difficult because the task force has already done a lot of that work. And then the other thing I wanted to do was congratulate Mayor Merkel, because she has just been awarded the Leadership Fairfax Award. And I tried to look it up, the exact thing, but it seems that everybody is awarding her various different things. And I just want to congratulate her and thank her for her service. So that's what I have.
Thank you, Signe. You're welcome. Thank you. Who's next? Bueller, anyone? Nobody? Really? Okay. Wow. Madam Vice Mayor, thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to say, usually this is one of the most exciting times of the year in Herndon, because we're doing things like this weekend. We would be going to see the holiday home tour, and then there would be the train show and the lighting of the tree on the green, as well as the crafts show at the community center. But now I look at our calendar and it's just all blank. So take times to decorate your own house and make the town festive. And maybe we can all just get in our cars or take walking tours around Herndon and feel like there's a little excitement out there. And any of the returning members of the town council, I'm here most of the time in December, with the exception of the wedding I'm going to, because I'm finally getting a girl. And anybody that wants to talk about any legislative type things, I'm happy to talk to anyone about it. I've been on the VML committee for a number of years. It does take a lot of work and preparation and discussions, which is way more than we're ever going to do at a town council meeting to iron out all the details. But it's like anything else. We can't put everything together in one town meeting before we send our town attorney off to put stuff together. But look forward to the new year, and I'm looking forward to our last meeting of 2020, and I'm sure hoping it turns out okay and 21 gives us some blessings. I'm ready to get back out there.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else? No. Well, I certainly concur with Sheila. What a year. I never would have dreamed that our last work session and public hearing together in person would have been last March. So it's a little bittersweet. This is our last work session that I'll chair, but it's been a wild ride, and looking forward to next week. Mr. Town Attorney, or Mr. Town Attorney, Mr. Town Manager, Madam Town Attorney, do you have anything to add at the end here as we're wrapping up?
No, Madam Mayor, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So that concludes our agenda this evening.
This is Zola, Madam Mayor. I move we adjourn, seeing there's no other business.
Baker, I'll second that.
All right. So we have a motion made by Sheila, seconded by Jen, and I will ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Olem,
Olem, yes.
Baker,
Baker, yes.
Delagula,
Delagula, yes.
DeCall,
DeCall, yes.
Friedrichs,
Friedrichs, yes.
McKenna,
McKenna is a yes.
and Mayor Merkel.
Merkel is yes. So that is unanimous, and we stand adjourned at 9:25 p.m.
Don't forget to wear your mask.
Happy December, everybody.
Out, guys.